Hey guys, how are you guys doing? In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at BGP as a protocol. And BGP as a protocol is a little different than the protocols that we've discussed so far, which are RIP, EIGRP, and OSPF. The purpose of BGP is to connect two different companies to each other, two different autonomous systems to each other. Let me get my pen up. So the purpose of BGP is to get two different companies or autonomous systems to each other. The predominant use of BGP is on the internet. As we have discussed earlier on, internet is basically connecting different computer networks to each other. This is done by the help of these companies known as internet service providers, the ISPs. Now on the on the internet, the ISPs connect to each other, connect their networks to other ISPs using BGP. So the purpose of BGP is not to work within the company, it is to work between different companies. And the predominant use of BGP is by the ISPs, the internet service providers. The reason for that, BGP as a protocol has the ability to carry large routing tables which are required for the internet. Large routing tables is what the characteristic or the forte of BGP is. All right. So basically, between your two different autonomous systems, let's say ISP1, and ISP is identified by this number given to them by IANA called the AS number. Autonomous system is basically a group of computers that belong to one company under one administrator unit. The AS number that is assigned to companies is between 65,001 through 65,535. So for example, ISP1 would have, let's say, an AS number assigned to them. Keep things simple, 100. Another ISP has AS200, AS300. The purpose of BGP is to connect these different ISPs to each other, different autonomous systems to each other. That's the predominant use of BGP. Now there is another use of BGP is in case, let's say I have a customer which is a big enough customer, a big enterprise, and what it has is it has a connection to two different ISPs to get to the internet. Why? Their company business is heavily dependent on the internet. So they want to keep redundancy. Not only redundancy, they also want to have load balancing where they pick the right routers to go to the internet. So for example, the ISPs to go to the internet. So for example, customer over here, router 1 has a link to the ISP1, another link to ISP2. What they want to do is they want to learn all the routes from the ISP so they can make the best decision of getting to the appropriate networks through the appropriate routers. So for example, if I have the network 155.1.0 over here, and there's another network 199.110 which is closer to ISP2, both the routes come into router 1. Router 1 will make the decision of getting, if the packet is destined to 150, using this particular path to go there. If it is destined to 199, it'll take this path to get there. So this type of customer, this type of client company is known as a multi-homed customer. This is another reason for running BGP. Again, from the customer's AS to ISP1 or customer's AS to ISP2. Generally, what the customers do is they don't have multiple connections. They only have one connection connecting them to the internet, so they don't have two ISPs. They have one route to go to the internet. In that case, generally, most common that you see is the edge router of the customer, the company, will use a default route, saying, hey, listen, I don't have all the routes, but my ISP does. So I'll have a default route pointing towards the ISP and they'll get there. The reason for running BGP at the customer side is generally if you have a multi-home type of setup. BGP is heavily run on the internet. All right, that's just an overview of BGP, what BGP does and where it plays. In terms of the characteristics, actually the two things that we'll take a look at, very simple over here in terms of BGP. The scope of BGP in this particular video is small. As we go into the other classes, you'll have a better understanding of BGP. We'll go into detail about BGP. So we'll take a look at the BGP characteristics and when to use it. Again, BGP as a protocol is a protocol that is used to connect different autonomous systems to each other. So it's going to be run between the autonomous systems. BGP is used to exchange routing information for the internet and is the protocol used between the ISPs. We talked about that already. Customer networks within the companies will run some form of an IGP, whether it's RIP, OSPF, EIGRP, but when they talk to the internet, to the ISP, they either have a default gateway pointing towards the ISP, or if in case of a multi-home type of setup, they might be running BGP over there. Now, when you communicate between two different autonomous systems, the form of BGP that we're going to be running is eBGP. And that's the main BGP, the external BGP or the BGP. Purpose of BGP is to connect two different autonomous systems to each other. So this is the real BGP. There are instances which are a little beyond the scope of this class that when you run BGP within the company, you can do that, and that BGP is called the internal BGP or interior BGP, IBGP. In this particular section over here, we're going to focus on eBGP, connecting one autonomous system to the other autonomous system. So if you take a look at our diagram that we'll be implementing in our lab later on, it'll look like this. So you have four different autonomous systems that are connected to each other, AS100, 200, 300, 400. They represent different companies. Now, one of the things that you need to understand, let's say these are different ISPs. Within the ISP, you are still going to run some form of an IGP. Let's say his IGP over here is OSPF. His IGP over here maybe is EIGRP. He's again running OSPF as an IGP over here. So whatever they run internally is irrelevant. Let's say this IGP over here is RIP. When they communicate between the edge routers, router 1, or this should be router 4, I'll fix that, to router 3, it is going to run BGP over here. As the name suggests, it stands for Border Gateway Protocol. It is going to be running on the edge devices. So just to give you a little bit a better idea of that. So let's say this is ISP 1 in AS100. I have multiple routers over here. They're connecting to each other. They're going to run some form of an IGP over here. Let's say they're running OSPF. I will learn all the routes in my routing table on R1. That's the edge router. Router 2 over here is also going to have a full system of routers internally connected to each other. They're going to run some type of IGP over here. Let's say EIGRP. Now once router 2 learns the routes, router 1 learns the route, router 1 and router 2, their border router, then decide what routes should be sent to the other autonomous system. So this is your ISP number 2, let's say running in AS200. So BGP would be run over here to advertise the routes that I learned through my IGPs and my internal system to the other autonomous system. So within the ISP, you'll still run some form of an IGP, but between ISPs, you're going to run BGP. That's where you run it. All right. Now, when to use it, I already talked about that. There are two different use case scenarios for BGP. The most common one is the ISP to ISP connection. ISPs will definitely use BGP to communicate to each other, exchange routes with each other. ISPs will generally run an IGP within the internal system, within the autonomous system. We talked about that. I showed you that example a minute ago. ISPs will also run IBGP internally within the autonomous system. Within the autonomous systems in some cases. So let's change this. In some cases, ISPs all run BGP internally. All right. So this is a more common aspect of running BGP, which is between the ISPs over here. So this would be a more common perspective of BGP, this guy over here. All right. Although that's the case, there are instances that the companies can connect up to the ISPs using BGP as well, and that's where I talked about the MultiHome Company, where the same company has a couple of connections to two different ISPs for the purpose of increasing performance or load balancing, and you run BGP to learn the routes from both the ISPs and pick the best route based on the distance, whatever your metric is to get to the final destination. So in the next video, I'm going to take a look at a very basic lab to connect up these different networks that we have over here to each other in 4 different autonomous systems. See you guys in that video then.